So, what if I told you there's this really detailed blueprint for political reform that says pretty much everything we think we know about change is, well, just wrong? We're talking about a very specific, and let's be honest, pretty controversial formula. It tells you exactly who should be in charge, how they should get there, and how the government should be set up. Let's dive into this 70-30 theory. You hear it all the time, right? The classic, throw the bums out. It's this idea that our problems would just vanish if we got a fresh set of faces in there. But what if that urge, the one for a total clean sweep, isn't just a bad idea, but could actually break the system even more? Well, that's exactly what this theory argues. Usually, the go-to solution is to bring in outsiders, celebrities, big shot CEOs, basically anyone who isn't a career politician. But this theory says that's a huge mistake. It claims we're mixing up being popular with actually being qualified. And that right there is step one on the road to failure. Okay, so if just grabbing popular people isn't the answer, what is? Well, the first part of this blueprint gets into who is actually qualified for the job. And believe me, it gets surprisingly specific. So the whole foundation of this idea is that running a country is not a performance. It's not about who has the most charisma or wins a popularity contest. It's a highly specialized profession, kind of like being a surgeon or an airline pilot. And according to this framework, it takes a skill set that most people, even really successful people, just don't have. Right, so if celebrities and popular figures are out, then who's in? This is where the blueprint stops being theoretical and starts writing a very, very specific job description for the ideal political candidate. The profile for the ideal candidate is incredibly narrow. First, it says no to entertainers, they're just performers. Then it argues against STEM experts and engineers, saying their skills just don't translate to governing. And it even warns against the passion and energy of people in their 20s and 30s. So who's left? The ideal candidate is a humanities-educated intellectual in their late 40s to 50s. So why the focus on humanities instead of, say, science or engineering? The thinking goes like this. Politics is all about operation, not technology. It's about managing people, navigating debates, and making compromises. This theory argues that a humanities education is what really trains your brain for that kind of operational thinking, which is seen as a totally different beast from an engineer's approach to problem solving. And what about that very specific age range? The idea here is that a person's late 40s and 50s are their intellectual prime. You spent decades soaking up knowledge, and now you're finally ready to put it all into practice. Younger folks, the theory goes, are still in the learning phase and are more likely to be driven by pure passion instead of the seasoned wisdom you need to govern effectively. So why this exact profile? Well, there are a few key reasons. First, these people can supposedly jump into heavy policy debates on day one, no training wheels needed. Second, they're thought to be past the point in life where they're trying to build a personal fortune, making them less likely to get tangled up in corruption. The idea is their focus has naturally shifted from personal gain to public service. Okay, so we've got the who, our ideal candidates, but how in the world do you actually get them into the system without causing total chaos? Well, the second part of this blueprint lays out a very clear mechanism for change, the 30-70 rule. This is called the 3-7 law of nature, and the claim is pretty bold that this isn't just some political tactic, but a fundamental law of how societies change. The big idea is that if you replace more than 30% of your leaders all at once, you're asking for disaster. It'll just paralyze the whole system, even if the people you kicked out were totally incompetent. The process is really methodical. Step 1. You bring in 30% of your new ideal candidates. Then, and this is important, you just wait. You let the system absorb the change and stabilize. Only after that do you start bringing in more, until the new group makes up 70% of the whole. But, and this is absolutely critical, the theory says you always have to keep a 30% minority of veterans around to maintain stability and institutional knowledge. This chart here really shows you the logic behind that 30% number. The theory basically says that any big change is going to have some negative side effects. If you keep the rate of change under 30%, society can handle it. But if you push past that to 50% or more, things get chaotic, and you might actually end up doing more harm than good. So, we have the right people, we have the right process to get them into power. But what's the end goal here? What does the perfect, stable political system actually look like according to this theory? This is where it gets really provocative. So the ideal government, according to this blueprint, is not a 50-50 split. It's not a system that's trying to find a perfect balance between two sides. Nope. It specifically calls for a 70% conservative majority and a 30% progressive minority.
And each side is given a very specific job. That 70% conservative majority, they're the ship's anchor. Their job is to hold the center, keep things stable, and stop society from suddenly lurching in some radical new direction. The 30% progressive minority, they're the engine. Their job is to constantly push for slow, gradual evolution, always challenging that anchor.
But now, this doesn't mean that 30% is just powerless. Not at all. The theory says that a really smart, effective progressive minority can and should win arguments against the majority. This whole imbalance is actually seen as a feature, not a bug. It forces the minority to be sharper, more strategic, and more persuasive to get anything done. And here is the big, flashing warning sign. Whatever you do, don't flip the ratio. A 70% progressive majority, this theory claims, would be a complete disaster. Without that heavy, stabilizing anchor from the conservative side, the whole ship of state would get pulled in a million directions at once, leading to total chaos. So there you have it, the whole thing, a complete three-part blueprint for political reform. It tells you exactly who should be in charge, precisely how they should come into power, and what the final political setup should look like to guarantee both stability and progress. It's a fascinating, and you gotta admit, very rigid theory that puts stability above everything else. But it leaves us with this massive question, doesn't it? Is this a blueprint for a mature, stable society? Or is it just a recipe for stagnation, a formula that's designed to put a permanent brake on the kind of big, transformative change we might really need? It's a challenging idea and definitely one worth thinking about.